I've hosted galas here for years. Ugh.
Then you'll drown in your own applause.
She slammed the violation notice against my chest before I could speak. Her voice sliced through the humid air like a warning siren. "You were told, Mr. Mercer. Fix that drainage or we'll fine you for every day it stays non-compliant." I looked past her, toward the street where muddy water was bubbling up through the manhole cover, the smell of rot already carried on the wind. "You think that's a drainage issue?" I said evenly. "That's a pressurized line about to fail." The clipboard queen tilted her head, lips curling into the kind of smirk only someone protected by a tidal could wear. "You engineers always dramatize. It's rainwater." No, it wasn't. It was raw sewage rising beneath the surface of Willowcrest's perfect lawns. And here's the moment you'll want to lean in. If you've ever warned someone in power, only to be laughed at right before the world proved you right, stay right here and hit subscribe right now. You're about to see what that looks like on the grandest stage an HOA ever built for its own downfall. I steadied my voice. "Eleanor Voss, I designed the backup systems for this neighborhood 15 years ago. I know exactly what's flowing under that asphalt." Her smile faltered for half a second, but the enforcer in crimson quickly masked it behind bureaucracy. "Then you should have known how to maintain your property, Mr. Mercer. That's not the HOA's concern." It was an outrageous lie. She knew it, I knew it, and the maintenance logs would prove it. But right then, she had an audience. 2 other board members, arms folded, nodding along as if they understood infrastructure. I could have shouted. I could have pointed out the risk to every foundation in the street. But I'd learned the hard way. Truth doesn't win against pride in the moment. It wins in silence when the evidence explodes louder than words ever could. The officer of rules checked her watch. "You have 48 hours to comply, or we escalate fines and enforcement." "Enforcement," I repeated quietly. "You mean intimidation?" Her heels clicked backward toward her SUV. "Call it what you like." That's when I felt that familiar shift inside me. Half humiliation, half precision. It's the moment every engineer knows before a structure collapses, when stress finds the weak point. I watched her drive off, red taillights reflecting in the shallow pool that now circled the curb like a warning halo. The smell thickened. Somewhere underground, a valve groaned. For context, my name's Daniel Mercer, civil engineer, former municipal systems designer, and this neighborhood, this flawless grid of manicured perfection, is my wife's hometown. When Nora's parents passed, the house became ours, along with the memories and the mistakes buried underneath it. That line beneath our street, I'd begged the board to reinforce it 5 years ago. I'd filed reports, submitted drawings, even offered to do the work at cost. Every time, the board chair, Eleanor Voss, called it unnecessary alarmism. They wanted decorative fountains, not functioning pipes. A Gala-worthy lakefront, not an invisible safety system. And now the cost of their arrogance was pushing up through the cracks. I knelt at the curb, pressing my palm against the asphalt. The vibration was unmistakable, pressure building fast. Somewhere deep, the system's emergency release valve had seized. That night, I logged everything. Every warning, every ignored email, every board signature denying repairs. The officer of rules could bury paperwork, but she couldn't bury timestamps. 2 days later, she returned, not to inspect the line, but to issue another fine. Her voice came sharp again, rehearsed. "You're obstructing community maintenance." I almost laughed. "I'm saving your community from itself." She raised a brow. "By defying orders?" "No," I said quietly. "By documenting negligence." The tyrant in heels looked uncertain then, a flicker of unease behind her precision-perfect expression, but she still turned away, pretending she hadn't heard me. When her car disappeared down the lane, I whispered to myself, "You've got 48 hours too, Eleanor." Because the pressure didn't just sit underground anymore. It was rising inside me too. And when those pipes gave way, so would every false claim she'd ever signed her name to. Where are you watching from tonight? Because this is where silence ends and consequence begins. By the next morning, the air in Willowcrest was thick with denial and fertilizer. Sprinklers hissed across trimmed lawns, masking the stench that had started creeping through the drains. The board chair, Eleanor Voss, stood in the middle of the cul-de-sac in her crimson suit, clipboard raised like a badge of authority, pretending she didn't smell what everyone else did. "You're spreading panic, Mr. Mercer," she said as I approached. "Residents are complaining that your warnings are disturbing community harmony." Harmony? That word tasted like poison. Behind her, water pooled along the sidewalk in strange brown swirls. Kids on bikes rode through it, laughing. Their tires left muddy trails that glistened with something slicker than rain. "Tell me," I said quietly, "does harmony include methane leaks and E. coli blooms?" The clipboard queen's smile stiffened. "You're exaggerating again. I reviewed your so-called engineering report. It's nothing but speculation." I kept my tone calm. "Speculation doesn't shake manhole covers." She stepped closer, lowering her voice so the onlookers couldn't hear. "Daniel, I know your background, but this isn't your jurisdiction anymore. You're a homeowner, not the city's engineer. Leave infrastructure to the professionals." Professionals. I almost laughed. The HOA had hired a landscaping company to inspect a pressurized sewer line. That's like asking a painter to defuse a bomb. A neighbor called from her porch. "Eleanor, something's bubbling near the playground." The officer of rules pretended not to hear. "We'll handle it," she said curtly. I looked her dead in the eyes. "No, you won't." Because I already had. That morning, I'd sent a coded report, complete with real-time data logs, to the county's public works department. The moment the pressure sensors spiked past threshold, their automated alert system would flag it. The enforcer in crimson didn't know it yet, but her empire of negligence had a timer on it now. Still, she kept up her performance. "You're to appear at the emergency HOA session tonight," she said. "We'll be discussing sanctions for your interference." "Interference?" I repeated. "You mean intervention." Her voice cut sharp. "You'll keep your tone respectful." I took one step closer, lowering mine. "You'll keep your neighborhood safe." For a heartbeat, neither of us moved. Then she turned away, heels clicking against the soaked concrete. The tyrant in heels carried herself like a woman untouchable by consequence, but the puddles mirrored every step she took, rippling outward like warnings. By afternoon, the situation worsened. The smell spread through basements. Sump pumps failed. The community Facebook group lit up with complaints, all of which Eleanor deleted within minutes. The officer of rules was now the censor of truth. I sat at my kitchen table, laptop open, scrolling through archive board emails. Every denial, every postponed maintenance order. It was all there. And I noticed something strange. The HOA had diverted funds allocated for sewer upkeep into aesthetic improvements for their upcoming gala. That was the moment the pattern clicked. Their arrogance wasn't just negligence, it was profit-driven. They'd rather host a champagne night than replace corroded valves. And tomorrow, their precious gala was scheduled at the Lake Pavilion, the lowest point in the entire neighborhood, the very place gravity would take the first surge of overflow. I leaned back in my chair, pulse steady, mind sharper than ever. They thought my silence was submission. They mistook patience for weakness. Let them. Because when the system finally failed, every corner of Willow Crest would witness what denial costs when it tries to outvote physics. Eleanor Voss could delete messages, issue fines, stage smiles, but she couldn't rewrite hydraulics. I saved my files to 3 separate drives, one local, one cloud, one USB tucked inside the old tool chest my father left me. That chest had his initials carved in it, a reminder that integrity isn't a virtue you inherit, it's one you defend. Outside, thunder rumbled over the horizon. The air shifted, heavier, charged, and as the first drops of rain hit the pavement, I whispered to the storm itself, "You're right on schedule." By the time the board met that evening, the puddles were no longer shallow, and the clipboard queen still believed the threat was just beneath her shoes, never realizing it was already inside the walls of her kingdom. By dusk, the emergency HOA session looked less like a meeting and more like a performance. Fairy lights lined the community hall windows, and Eleanor Voss, ever the enforcer in crimson, stood at the center of it all, flanked by 2 board members who nodded before she even spoke. She opened the session with her usual weaponized calm. "Residents," she announced, "we've received unfounded allegations of infrastructure failure These rumors are damaging property values and morale. I sat in the back row, hands folded, biting down the urge to laugh. Outside, a wet gust of air carried the sour odor of what she called rumors. The clipboard queen scanned the room and landed on me. "Mr. Mercer," she said sweetly, "you'll have your turn, but let's remember, you are under review for non-compliance." I rose slowly. "Non-compliance?" I asked. "You mean for reporting a health hazard?" A murmur rolled through the room. Eleanor's smile tightened. "For exaggerating and frightening residents." That's when I noticed her, Laura Gibson, the HOA treasurer. Mid-40s, neat bun, hands trembling on a stack of papers she couldn't seem to let go of. The conflicted witness. I'd seen her glance at the maintenance invoices before, the ones with numbers that didn't add up. Laura's eyes darted to mine for half a second, then to Eleanor, then down again. The board chair caught the motion and narrowed her gaze. "Is there something you'd like to add, Laura?" Laura froze. Her throat worked once before she managed, "Just, the budget's been tight." "The budget," I said softly, "has been siphoned." Eleanor turned on me like a switchblade snapping open. "Enough!" she barked. "You will not accuse this board of criminal conduct." "Then show the receipts," I replied. Her knuckles whitened around the podium edge. "We are not obligated to disclose internal expenditures to a disruptive homeowner." "Not obligated?" I took a slow breath. "You are when those expenditures directly endanger public safety." For the first time, the tyrant in heels hesitated. Just a flicker, but enough for the audience to feel it. You could sense the shift in the air. People started whispering. The invisible wall she'd built between her authority and their doubt began to crack. Eleanor quickly shifted tone, performing concern. "Mr. Mercer," she said smoothly, "you've been under immense stress. We understand your background. Retired engineer, widowed father, a man trying to contribute. But we can't allow paranoia to dictate policy." Widowed father. She weaponized it. Like a dagger. Every head turned toward me. Every sound seemed to vanish except the steady drip from the leaky ceiling vent above. I met her stare. "You think grief makes me wrong? It only makes me watch closer." Silence. That's when the first deep rumble rolled beneath the floor. Not thunder, pressure. It was faint, but real. The metal legs of the folding chairs rattled. Someone gasped. Eleanor's composure faltered again, her eyes darting toward the door. I stepped forward. "You hear that?" I said quietly. "That's your negligence breathing." The officer of rules forced a smile. "It's the air system, nothing more." "No," I said. "It's the system you ignored." Laura's papers slipped from her hands. They scattered across the floor. Maintenance records, invoices, and one document stamped deferred repair authorization. Everyone saw it. Eleanor's mask cracked. "Pick those up," she snapped. But Laura didn't move. Her jaw trembled, and when she spoke, her voice broke like something that had been held too long. "He's right," she whispered. "We moved the repair funds for the Gala." Gasps rippled through the hall. The enforcer in crimson stood frozen, pupils wide, like a queen suddenly aware the crowd was seeing her crown melt. She tried to regain ground. "This is slander." "No," I cut in. "This is consequence." The power flickered. The room plunged into brief darkness. And in that moment, through the open window, came the unmistakable stench of sewage carried by the night wind. When the lights came back on, Eleanor Voss was no longer the untouchable tyrant in heels. She was a woman, standing ankle-deep in the fear she had created. And I knew then. The collapse had already begun. By morning, the neighborhood had turned into a study in denial. The HOA's message board lit up with phrases like temporary drainage anomaly and routine system adjustment. But the smell in the air said otherwise. It was no longer faint. It was everywhere. Eleanor Voss still strutted through the cul-de-sac like nothing was wrong, her crimson jacket bright against the gray dawn. The board chair didn't walk. She paraded, clipboard in hand, every step calculated to project control. She even waved at residents hauling buckets of brown water out of their basements. "We appreciate your cooperation during this minor inconvenience," she said. Minor inconvenience. That was her phrase. The one she'd keep repeating right up until the flood made her eat those words. I watched her from my porch, coffee untouched, as she supervised a maintenance crew she'd clearly hired to look busy. The crew wasn't touching the problem. They were just skimming storm drains and nodding like extras in her show. When she saw me, she smiled with that corporate venom only people in power can perfect. "Still convinced the sky is falling, Mr. Mercer?" "Not the sky," I said. "The ground." Her smirk didn't fade. "You can't intimidate me with jargon. My maintenance manager assured me everything is under control." I gestured toward the bubbling manhole by her SUV. "Then tell your maintenance manager to explain that." The clipboard queen followed my gaze, and for a flicker, her confidence cracked. The manhole trembled, water surging beneath it like something alive. She took a step back, then two. But as quickly as it came, the fear vanished. "You're being dramatic," she snapped, regaining her stance. "That's just runoff." I leaned against my railing. "You keep telling yourself that, Eleanor, but physics doesn't negotiate." Before she could respond, Laura appeared from across the street, frazzled, dark circles under her eyes, phone clutched tight. The conflicted witness looked like she hadn't slept. "Eleanor," she called, voice tight. "The contractors, they're saying pressure's exceeding limits near the retention basin. They can't stop it." The enforcer in crimson turned on her like a wolf spotting weakness. "Keep your voice down, Laura. We don't need rumors spreading." Laura hesitated. "It's not rumors. The city monitors—" "I said keep it down," Eleanor hissed. Then she turned to me, eyes sharp. "And you, stop feeding hysteria. I won't let you derail our gala preparations with fear-mongering." That word again, gala, the same event she'd funneled the maintenance budget into, the one scheduled at the Lake Pavilion sitting directly downhill from the swelling pipes. I stepped forward. "You're hosting your gala on top of a ticking bomb, and you know it," she scoffed. "We'll host it just fine. Maybe you should stay home. You're not exactly welcome this week." Something in her tone wasn't just disdain, it was threat. "Are you banning me from a public venue now?" Her lips curved in a poisonous grin. "Consider it a safety precaution. For everyone." The officer of rules strode back toward her car, heels clicking through puddles that reflected the red of her jacket like blood in water. Laura waited until she was gone, then whispered, "Daniel, she's ignoring the readings. The sensors are spiking. The system can't handle another rainfall." "I know," I said, "which is why I need you to send me those readings, every one of them." Quietly. Her voice trembled. "If she finds out—" "She will," I said calmly. "But by then, it'll be too late for her lies to matter." That night, I sat at my desk, reviewing the files Laura sent. The numbers were worse than I thought. Pressure in the main line had reached triple the maximum tolerance. Any additional surge, and the system wouldn't just leak. It would rupture. The storm forecast showed 80% rain for tomorrow, the same day as their gala. I closed the laptop and looked out the window toward the pavilion lights flickering across the lake. The clipboard queen would toast champagne under those chandeliers tomorrow night, never realizing that beneath her perfect flooring, 100,000 gallons of raw sewage waited for its cue. The clock was ticking now, and she'd said it herself. By the time the morning of the gala arrived, the clouds hung low like the sky itself was holding its breath. You could smell the tension in the air, metallic, humid, electric. I stood by my truck, watching as Eleanor Voss, the clipboard queen herself, inspected the decorative lights strung across the lake pavilion. She barked orders with the precision of a commander before battle, her crimson blazer blazing even against the dull gray backdrop. "Make sure the catering tables are aligned with HOA regulations," she ordered, not even glancing at the flooded edge of the lawn. "And keep that pump running. No excuses." I wanted to tell her the pump wasn't just failing, it was lying. It was masking the growing roar beneath the soil. But the enforcer in crimson didn't listen to warnings. She only listened to applause. Residents in formal wear began to arrive, umbrellas dotting the lot like nervous soldiers preparing for a storm they pretended not to see. Champagne flowed, laughter tried to overwrite fear, and still, the waterline crept closer to the stage. Laura approached me near the maintenance shed, her expression pale. The conflicted witness looked like a woman trapped between conscience and consequence. "She won't cancel," she whispered. "I showed her the readings. She said I'm fear-mongering." I glanced toward the board chair, who was shaking hands with the mayor's assistant. "She's betting the system holds another day," I said. "But it won't." Laura's eyes darted to the lake, where tiny ripples began to fan out from the drainage outlet. If the overflow valve fails, it won't fail, I said, tightening my voice. It already did. The clipboard queen finally spotted me and strutted over, heels sinking slightly into the softening soil. Mr. Mercer, she said sweetly, I trust you're here as a guest, not as our self-appointed engineer. I'm here as a witness, I said. To what? Her tone carried the smugness of a woman who'd never faced accountability. Another one of your alarmist theories? To what happens, I replied, when arrogance meets gravity. Her eyes narrowed. You're threatening me. No, I said softly. I'm warning you, again. For a heartbeat, the tyrant in heels faltered. The wind carried the faint, unmistakable hiss of pressure escaping somewhere deep underground. Her gaze flickered toward the pavilion floor, then back to me. Maintenance has it handled, she said. You're dismissed. But she was already sweating beneath that crimson armor. By 6 p.m., the sky finally broke. Rain hit the pavilion roof like fists on a drum. People huddled under awnings, laughing nervously, pretending it was all fine. Eleanor raised her champagne glass and gave a speech about resilience and community pride. It was almost poetic, watching her speak about unity while the ground she ruled began to betray her. Behind the podium, water seeped through the decking. I could see it, a small trickle near the base of the stage, spreading fast. Eleanor noticed it too, but kept talking. We, the board, have always upheld the highest standards of safety and maintenance. The words drowned beneath the sharp hiss of a bursting joint. Screams cut through the rain. The decorative lights flickered. Brown water surged up through the cracks, flooding across the pristine floor. The orchestra instruments toppled first, then the chairs. Guests scrambled, shoes slipping in sewage and panic. Eleanor froze, eyes wide, drenched in the very disaster she denied. The clipboard queen dropped her microphone, its screech echoing through the chaos. I shouted over the noise, "That's your maintenance plan in action." She spun toward me, mascara streaking down her face. You did this." "No," I said, stepping closer. "You did this when you ignored the truth." The enforcer in crimson tried to regain control, shouting at staff, at the crowd, at the water. But it didn't listen either. Nature had taken the microphone now. Laura grabbed my arm as the pavilion lights shorted out. "Daniel, the current's running through the cables!" she cried. We pulled people back, cutting power from the main box. The officer of rules screamed something about liability, about lawsuits, but the words were drowned by the rising tide. Within minutes, the gala that was supposed to symbolize control became a scene of poetic retribution. The lake had come for its due, and in that moment, Eleanor Voss, the clipboard queen, the tyrant in heels, finally stopped talking. Because for the first time, she had nothing left to control. The silence that followed wasn't peace, it was judgment. The night after the flood, our neighborhood smelled like rot and shame. The rain had stopped, but the air was still thick, heavy with the stench of what the board had buried, both literally and politically. The cleanup trucks had come and gone, leaving behind yellow caution tape and silence. Eleanor Voss emerged from that silence like a phoenix made of denial. The clipboard queen wore her usual crimson blazer, though the hem was stained dark where the sewage had licked it. She was already giving orders before dawn. "Containment first, optics second," she said to a contractor who clearly wanted to quit. "We'll control the narrative before the city does." The tyrant in heels wasn't just trying to manage the mess, she was rewriting it. Flyers appeared on doors by sunrise claiming an unprecedented weather anomaly had caused the incident. Not mismanagement, not corruption, just bad luck. But bad luck didn't smell like diesel and rot. It smelled like cover-up. Laura met me at the end of my driveway, her eyes red from crying. "They're threatening to fire me," she said. "Eleanor's blaming me for the maintenance misallocation." Of course she was. The officer of rules always needed someone to fall before she did. I handed Laura a sealed folder. Inside are the original maintenance requests and the inspection reports you sent me. The timestamps are digital, unalterable. Keep them somewhere safe. Her hands trembled. "What are you going to do?" "Something she doesn't expect," I said. "I'm going to use her own obsession against her." Across the street, Eleanor barked at a news crew she hadn't invited. The local station had caught wind of the flood and showed up early. No comment, she snapped. This community's private. You're trespassing. But the reporter didn't leave. Cameras rolled as residents stood behind her, crossing their arms, their trust finally cracked open. One elderly neighbor, Mrs. DuPont, shouted, "My basement's a swamp because of you." Eleanor's lips twitched. "The board will handle all claims in due process." "Due process?" I called out. "You mean like the last inspection you skipped?" Every camera swung toward me. The enforcer in crimson froze mid-step. "You're spreading misinformation again," she said through clenched teeth. "Then prove me wrong," I replied. "Show the paperwork. The real one, not the one you forged with changed dates." Her nostrils flared. "You're accusing me of fraud?" "No," I said evenly. "I'm reminding you that digital signatures don't lie. You can shred paper, Eleanor, but you can't erase metadata." The reporter's eyebrow rose. Metadata? Perfect. The word landed exactly where I wanted it to. The clipboard queen had built her empire on appearances, neatly typed memos, framed certificates, ironed policies. But the truth wasn't on paper. It was in the network of maintenance logs I'd already mirrored to the city inspector's office. She sensed it. I saw the flicker of calculation behind her eyes. "You think your little tech jargon scares me?" she snapped. I stepped closer, lowering my voice so only she could hear. "It's not the jargon that'll hurt you. It's the timestamps." For once, she had no comeback. The silence stretched. Only the buzz of the camera mics filled it. That afternoon, the HOA board called an emergency session. No gala lights, no champagne, just sweat, fear, and the faint smell of chlorine from the cleaning crews trying to wash away the evidence. The enforcer in crimson sat at the head of the table, chin raised, pretending she still had control. "Effective immediately," she announced. "The HOA will conduct an internal audit. Any resident found responsible for spreading false information will face legal action." I laughed softly. "You really want to audit this, Eleanor? Then let's do it publicly. City oversight, real investigators." Her voice sharpened. "You don't have that authority." I leaned forward. "No, but the city inspector I called this morning does." Every head turned toward the door as a man in a gray uniform stepped in, flashing his badge. The tyrant in heels finally stopped speaking. Her pen slipped from her hand and clattered onto the table. Outside, thunder rumbled again. Not rain this time, just the sound of inevitability approaching. She'd ruled by fear and silence. Now, the silence had turned against her. The next morning, the air in the cul-de-sac was heavy with something worse than humidity, truth trying to surface. The city inspector's truck was parked by the curb, its yellow hazard lights flashing like beacons of reckoning. Residents gathered on their lawns, whispering in small circles, watching the board members scurry around like ants under a magnifying glass. Eleanor Voss stood in the center of it all, immaculate, unflinching, pretending the storm hadn't already washed away her power. The clipboard queen clutched a fresh binder of updated reports, as if paperwork could patch a sewer line or rewrite physics. She smiled for the cameras, her voice honeyed poison. "We're cooperating fully," she said. "This is a routine review, nothing more." But her eyes, darting toward me, told a different story. Panic, dressed up as confidence. I leaned against my truck, waiting. Because this wasn't about luck anymore. This was about exposure. Laura approached from behind me, clutching a folder to her chest. Her hands were shaking. "Daniel," she whispered, "I can't keep quiet anymore. She made me falsify the safety report 3 months ago." The words came out like a confession and a scream at once. I turned slowly. "You're sure about this?" She nodded, tears threatening. "She said it was just formatting, that she'd fix the numbers herself. But she replaced entire sections, deleted the part where I warned about the mainline blockage." The conflicted witness had finally stepped across the line, and the board chair's empire was about to collapse under her own edits. "Laura," I said quietly, "what you just told me is more powerful than anything I could prove. You ready for what comes next?" She hesitated. "If she finds out—" "She already suspects," I said. "But fear only works if you stay silent." At that exact moment, Eleanor's voice cut through the murmurs like a whip. "Mr. Mercer! Ms. Price!" The enforcer in crimson strode toward us, heels sinking slightly into the damp grass. "Discussing private HOA matters again? You two seem to have trouble respecting protocol. Laura stiffened beside me. Protocol? She said softly. You mean falsifying reports? Eleanor froze mid-step. The air between them snapped tight, like a live wire. Careful, she said. Defamation has consequences. Truth does too, I added. Her gaze turned sharp enough to cut glass. You think you're clever, Daniel, but you've made a very costly enemy. I smiled faintly. Only if you still have anything left to spend? The officer of rules turned sharply on her heel, storming toward the inspector, now speaking with a few residents. Her voice rose, sharp and defensive. These so-called allegations are baseless. The board followed every maintenance protocol. The inspector raised an eyebrow. Interesting, he said, because the time-stamped logs your HOA submitted don't match the city records. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. For the first time, Eleanor Voss, queen of the clipboard, mistress of the facade, had nothing to say. Laura looked at me, fear mixing with relief. What happens now? Now, I said. We make sure this story doesn't get buried. She handed me a flash drive. Everything's on here, the originals, the alterations, her emails. I couldn't live with it anymore. I closed my hand around it. You just gave the city something better than evidence. You gave them motive. From across the lawn, Eleanor's voice carried over, brittle and trembling. This investigation will end my community before it ends me. Her words cracked in the middle. For the first time, she sounded human, not powerful, not polished, just desperate. The clipboard queen disappeared into the HOA office. Slamming the glass door behind her, Laura exhaled shakily. She's not going down quietly. She doesn't have to, I said. The truth's loud enough. As thunder rolled again in the distance, I glanced toward the storm drains glistening under the afternoon sun. Silent now, but not clean. The water had receded, but the stain it left behind was permanent. And while Eleanor Voss tried to rewrite her reputation, I was already preparing the final draft, the one she couldn't edit. By the next day, the air in Crestwood Estates felt like it was holding its breath. The lawns were quiet, the mailboxes full, and nobody waved anymore. Everyone was waiting for the next move, for the truth to finally rip through the polite silence that Eleanor Voss had ruled for years. The board chair had called for a recovery meeting, her term for damage control dressed in diplomacy. She stood outside the HOA office, immaculate once again, her crimson jacket pressed to perfection. To the neighbors, she still looked like control personified, but to me, she looked like a matchstick standing in a field of gasoline. Inside the office, I took a seat near the back. The clipboard queen sat at the head of the long oak table, the symbol of her power polished to a glare. Her voice was calm, almost hypnotic. We've faced challenges before, she began, but this community is strong. We don't turn on each other, we rebuild together. She knew exactly how to play her audience, shame them into silence, drown dissent in faux unity. When she paused for applause, only 3 people clapped. Laura sat across from her, pale but steady. She didn't look like the terrified assistant anymore. She looked like someone who'd chosen a side. The enforcer in crimson noticed. Ms. Price, she said, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. You've been quiet. Would you like to add something? Laura's hands trembled slightly, but her voice didn't. Yes, she said. I'd like to correct the record. Every head turned. Eleanor's didn't. She just kept smiling. The record is already clear, she said sweetly. No, Laura said. It's not. You deleted my warnings, forged my name, and endangered residents. You let that sewer line collapse to save money for your event. The room fell dead silent. The sound of the air conditioner kicking on was the only thing moving. The tyrant in heels didn't blink. That's a serious accusation, she said coolly. Do you have proof? Laura's hand moved to her bag, and that's when I stood. She doesn't need to, I said, because I already sent it to the inspector's office last night. The emails, the alteration logs, everything. Eleanor's mask cracked, just a fraction, but it was enough. Her fingers tightened around her pen until it snapped. You violated HOA confidentiality, she hissed. No, I said. You violated public safety. There's a difference. Her voice rose, sharp and frantic now. You think this makes you a hero? You think destroying the board helps this community? I took a step forward. It's not about destroying the board. It's about reminding it that it serves people, not power. Behind her, one of the other board members, a man named Reynolds, shifted uncomfortably. Eleanor, he said, maybe we should let the inspector finish his report before... Before what? She snapped. Before these two spread more lies? Laura looked at her, unflinching. Before the truth finishes what you started. The clipboard queen stood, slamming her folder shut. Meeting adjourned. But nobody moved, not this time. Neighbors were already whispering. Someone recorded the whole thing on their phone. Another resident opened the door to find a local reporter waiting just outside. The enforcer in crimson froze in the doorway, realizing too late that she'd just been cornered. Not by me, not by Laura, but by her own arrogance. I leaned against the table, lowering my voice just enough for her to hear. You spent years silencing people, Eleanor. Maybe it's time the community got to speak. Her eyes burned with fury and fear. You'll regret this, Mercer. I smiled faintly. That's what you said before the flood. Outside, the sound of thunder rolled again, but this time it wasn't weather. It was consequence. Laura exhaled beside me, her relief fragile but real. You think this will be enough? Not yet, I said, watching Eleanor Voss retreat down the hall, her red blazer a fading streak of rage. But the storm's not done with her. Because when truth starts rising, it doesn't stop halfway. The morning after the confrontation, Crestwood Estates no longer belonged to Eleanor Voss. It belonged to whispers, to murmurs through cracked blinds and cautious looks exchanged between neighbors. The illusion of control had shattered, and the board chair could feel the shards cutting through her perfect composure. But she wasn't done fighting. Not yet. I knew her type too well. The enforcer in crimson had built her entire empire on dominance and image. When those things started to crumble, she wouldn't retreat quietly. She'd launch one final strike, desperate to salvage her throne of paperwork and pretense. I found out about her next move before she even made it. Laura called me early that morning, voice trembling but determined. She's organizing a closed session emergency hearing, she said. Only board members and legal counsel. She wants to vote you out of the community for public disruption. I laughed softly. She really thinks that'll save her? She's panicking, Laura whispered. She called it for tonight. Good. Let her dig her own hole. By noon, flyers appeared on every porch again. Official HOA stationery. The same polished logo, now smeared by humidity and hypocrisy. Unlawful behavior threatens our neighborhood's reputation, the headline read. And below, in smaller font, all residents must refrain from unauthorized contact with media until board review concludes. The clipboard queen was trying to rewrite the story, again. But this time, the neighborhood wasn't buying it. I spent the afternoon at the community center, preparing. The city inspector's interim report had already confirmed negligence and falsified data. But I had something more powerful than paperwork. I had people. Residents started showing up, one by one. Mrs. DuPont with her cane. The Harris twins, still cleaning mud out of their basement. Even Tom Reynolds, one of the remaining board members, slipped me a quiet nod as he entered. They'd all seen the truth, and now they were ready to stand behind it. When the sun dipped below the rooftops, the stage was set. Eleanor Voss arrived right on time, heels clicking like gunfire, a storm of red fabric and forced authority. "This is a private meeting," she announced sharply, eyeing the crowd gathering in the community hall. "Then you should have kept your lies private too," I said. Her jaw tightened. "You're trespassing, Daniel. This isn't your forum." "Funny," I said, holding up a printed copy of the city's public meeting notice. "Looks like it is now." The clipboard queen's face drained of color. The city inspector had authorized an open forum for residents to discuss public safety violations, legally binding, officially sanctioned. The officer of rules had been trapped by her own rulebook. She tried to recover. "We can still discuss this professionally?" "Professionally?" I interrupted. "You mean the way you professionally ignored warnings until half this neighborhood was swimming in sewage?" The murmurs in the room turned into low, angry voices. People began standing, recounting their own grievances, the fines, the bullying, the forced paint color changes, the threats of foreclosure. Each story was another crack in her polished armor. Eleanor raised her hand, trying to regain control. "Order!" This meeting is out of order. But nobody listened. Laura stepped forward then, trembling but resolute. Eleanor, she said softly, I used to believe in what you built, but you built it on fear. You didn't lead this community, you ruled it. For a heartbeat, the tyrant in heels said nothing. Then she turned her gaze on me, cold and venomous. You think you've won, Daniel? You've just turned neighbors against each other. That's not victory, that's chaos. I met her stare. Maybe, but sometimes you have to tear down a rotten structure before you can rebuild something worth living in. The room fell silent. The enforcer in crimson stood motionless at the podium, realizing there was no vote left to call, no order left to issue. Her kingdom had revolted. She gathered her papers slowly, one trembling hand after another, each page sounding like another nail in her coffin. This community, she whispered, will regret this. I stepped forward, lowering my voice. Maybe, but at least this time, it'll be our regret, not yours. When she left, the room didn't cheer. It didn't need to. The silence itself was victory, a silence she no longer controlled. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying the faint scent of chlorine and mud through the streetlights. The storm was over, but the reckoning had just begun. Eleanor Voss had ruled Crestwood Estates for too long. Now she would answer to it. The night air in Crestwood Estates carried that electric stillness, the kind that hums before a storm or a confession. Every porch light was on, every curtain drawn back. The entire neighborhood had turned into an audience, waiting to see whether justice would finally drown out control. And at the center of it all stood Eleanor Voss. The board chair had returned to her fortress, her office, trying to reassemble authority from the ruins. But her hands were shaking. The woman who once ruled every detail of this place down to the color of mailboxes now faced a community that no longer feared her signature. I walked into that office with Laura beside me. The smell of coffee and disinfectant filled the air, sterile, desperate, just like the person sitting behind the desk. Eleanor looked up, her crimson blazer catching the faint glow of the desk lamp. You think this ends with me, Daniel? She said, her tone brittle. It doesn't. You've poisoned them with half-truths. No, I said, stepping closer. You poisoned this place with neglect. I just turned on the light. The clipboard queen stood, her posture immaculate, but her eyes hollow. You don't understand what I've carried, she said. Budgets, politics, reputation. It's not easy keeping this place from collapsing. I met her gaze evenly. It collapsed the moment you put your image before your duty. Her jaw clenched. You talk like a martyr, she said quietly. But you're just another man looking for attention. I leaned on her desk. I'm a civil engineer who warned you that your sewer lines were overdue for replacement. You laughed. Then you held a gala over them. She flinched, just slightly. For a long moment, she didn't speak. Then the officer of rules tried one last defense. Even if everything you claim is true, you think anyone will remember your name? You think they'll make you a hero? I don't need to be remembered, I said. I just need them to stop being afraid. Outside, I could hear voices gathering near the courtyard, residents, journalists, city officials. The inspector was already there, ready to present his findings. The tyrant in heels smoothed her jacket and walked past me, chin lifted high, as though walking into a coronation instead of an execution. We followed her outside. Floodlights illuminated the front lawn where the podium had been set up. The crowd was larger than I expected. Neighbors who'd never dared speak before, all standing shoulder to shoulder now. The city inspector cleared his throat and held up a stack of documents. The investigation confirms extensive falsification of maintenance records, he said. The HOA knowingly ignored public health warnings, resulting in environmental contamination and financial liability. Effective immediately, the city is suspending the current HOA board pending formal review. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Eleanor's hand went to her throat. Suspending? She whispered, color draining from her face. Laura stepped forward, voice steady. You forged my signature. You ignored warnings that could have saved this neighborhood. You made me part of it, and I won't carry that anymore. The enforcer in crimson turned to me, eyes burning. You did this, she said, voice trembling. You destroyed everything I built. No, I said softly. You destroyed yourself the moment you stopped listening. She stared at me for a long second, then turned away, her heels clicking across the concrete like echoes of retreat. The clipboard queen, once untouchable, now walked through her former subjects as they stepped aside, not out of respect, but release. A small boy pointed from his mother's arms. "Is she in trouble, Mom?" His mother hesitated, then said quietly, "She's learning consequences." And just like that, the crowd began to disperse. The power had shifted, not violently, but completely. Laura exhaled beside me. "It's over." I shook my head slightly. For her, maybe, but for this place, it's just beginning. Because rebuilding trust is harder than exposing corruption. And redemption, for people like Eleanor Voss, doesn't come with applause. She stopped at the edge of the street, turning once toward me under the floodlights. "You think they'll thank you for this?" she called. I looked back at her. "No, but at least they'll finally breathe." She didn't reply. The tyrant in heels simply walked into the darkness, the sound of her retreat swallowed by the quiet night. The same quiet she once ruled. The night of the public confrontation felt like the final chapter of a story, written in arrogance and sewage. The smell of chlorine still clung faintly to the air around Crestwood Estates, a reminder of what had been buried, literally, and what had finally surfaced. Eleanor Voss stood on the steps of the community hall beneath the harsh white lights, every inch of her posture designed to look composed. The board chair wore her signature crimson blazer, shoulders squared like a general refusing to surrender. But the crowd in front of her wasn't an army. It was a jury. Reporters lined the walkway. Neighbors held phones aloft. Every lens was waiting to see what kind of woman could smile after flooding her own community with 100,000 gallons of waste. I stood at the back of the crowd, arms crossed, watching the clipboard queen prepare to perform one last time. She cleared her throat, tapping the mic. "Good evening, residents," she began, her voice smooth as glass. "There's been misinformation circulating about the recent incident." A murmur rippled through the crowd. "Let me be clear," the enforcer in crimson continued. "The gala was approved, inspected, and safely coordinated. Any system failures occurred because of tampering. We are cooperating fully with the city to identify the responsible party." My jaw tightened. She was going to spin it. Even now, with every fact stacked against her, Eleanor Voss was rewriting reality. Laura stepped up beside me. "You ready?" she whispered. I nodded. "She wanted an audience. Let's give her one." We pushed through the crowd until I was standing 10 feet away from the podium. Her eyes flicked toward me mid-sentence, faltering for just half a breath before she recovered. "Mr. Mercer," she said smoothly, "perhaps you'd like to stop disrupting official proceedings?" I smiled slightly. "This isn't official anymore, remember? The board's been suspended." A hush fell over the crowd. Cameras pivoted. Eleanor's smile froze, brittle as porcelain. "That suspension is under review," she said sharply. "Until then, I'm still the acting—" "You're acting all right," I cut in. "Pretending the sewer line you ignored didn't rupture because you diverted maintenance funds into your gala's fireworks." Gasps erupted. Someone in the crowd shouted, "Is that true?" The tyrant in heels stiffened. "Baseless accusations?" she snapped. "My records are impeccable." I pulled my phone from my pocket and raised it high. "Then you won't mind if everyone sees the contractor invoices you falsified." Her eyes widened just slightly. The silence was deafening. The city inspector stepped forward then, his clipboard gleaming under the lights. "Those documents were verified this morning," he said clearly. "The maintenance report was altered to hide safety violations. Mrs. Voss, the evidence is conclusive." The officer of rules finally cracked. "Do you have any idea what this will do to my reputation?" she shouted. "You're destroying me." I met her eyes. "You destroyed yourself the moment you put appearances above people." For the first time, her voice trembled. "You think I wanted this? You think I chose to become the villain?" Laura stepped forward, her voice cutting through the tension. "You didn't choose to be the villain, Eleanor. You chose to never be accountable." The crowd erupted, not with cheers, but with applause that sounded like thunder against her silence. Eleanor Voss tried to speak again, but her words were swallowed by the noise. The crimson in her blazer now looked less like confidence and more like warning. She stepped back from the mic, shaking her head as flashlights and cameras surrounded her. Her empire had finally drowned in truth. As she turned to leave, I called out, You once said control is everything, didn't you? She stopped, glancing over her shoulder. Well, I said, you just lost it. Her lips parted as if to respond, but no words came. The clipboard queen simply walked down the steps, her heels striking like metronomes of defeat, fading beneath the sound of the community reclaiming its voice. Laura looked at me, her eyes wet but steady. You think she'll ever admit it? People like her never do, I said. But she'll remember this silence for the rest of her life. The floodlights dimmed, the crowd began to scatter, and somewhere behind us, the sound of a pipe groaned in the distance, a fitting echo of everything that had burst beneath her reign. The tyrant in heels was gone. The neighborhood had finally taken back its air. When dawn broke over Crestwood Estates, the sky looked cleaner than it had in months. Maybe it was just the rain washing away what the flood had left behind. Or maybe it was the kind of calm that follows when truth finally drains the poison out of a place. Eleanor Voss didn't show up that morning. The board chair's car sat abandoned outside the HOA office. The crimson blazer she was so proud of folded neatly on the passenger seat, like a uniform she'd resigned from. The clipboard queen was gone, but her absence hung over the neighborhood like a warning label. I walked the same stretch of sidewalk where the first complaint had started months ago, back when the sewage smell was just a whisper, and everyone believed Eleanor had everything under control. The officer of rules always looked so sure of herself then, so untouchable. I used to envy that confidence. Now I saw it for what it was. Fear dressed as power. Neighbors were already outside, sweeping driveways, checking basements, helping each other repair what the flood had destroyed. Real community, the kind that doesn't need titles or bylaws to function, was slowly returning. Laura joined me, her hair pulled back, clipboard in hand. Not as a symbol of authority this time, but of rebuilding. She resigned last night, she said quietly. Filed it with the city before midnight. I nodded. About time. Laura hesitated. Part of me feels sorry for her. I glanced toward the empty HOA building. So do I. Power corrupts, but isolation finishes the job. She built a cage out of rules and called it leadership. We walked toward the old community hall, now serving as a temporary relief center. Inside, volunteers handed out supplies, coffee, and forms for financial claims. I caught fragments of laughter amid exhaustion. Hope had a sound again. But then, through the open door, I saw her. Eleanor Voss stood at the far edge of the lawn, staring at the damage like a ghost visiting the ruins of her kingdom. No entourage, no clipboard, just her, pale, still, and stripped of the armor she'd worn for years. I walked up slowly. She didn't turn until I spoke. Didn't expect to see you here. Her voice was quieter than I'd ever heard it. I came to see what I'd done. The enforcer in crimson, now in gray, looked nothing like the woman who once ruled this place through fear. Her hands trembled slightly. They'll replace me with someone worse, you know, she said. That's what always happens. Maybe, I said. But maybe this time, they'll choose someone who listens. Her eyes met mine, tired but sharp. You're proud of yourself? No, I said. Just relieved. Eleanor looked around, watching neighbors work together. You think they'll forgive me? Forgiveness isn't owed, I said softly. It's earned. She gave a faint smile. You sound like someone who's been on both sides of this. Maybe I have. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The wind carried the faint hum of pumps clearing what little water remained in the drainage ditches. Somewhere, a child laughed, an unfamiliar sound in this place that had known too much tension. When she finally walked away, there was no applause, no ceremony, just the slow, inevitable fade of a woman who'd built her identity on control and lost it in the most poetic way possible, drowned by her own denial. Laura joined me again. Think she'll come back? She might, I said. People like her always think they can rebuild the illusion, but this time, the foundation's gone. I turned toward the camera crew packing up by the curb. You know, I said, this wasn't just about sewage. It was about truth, how long it takes to surface, and what it destroys when it finally does. Laura smiled faintly. You should tell that story. I already did. Because every fight like this carries a lesson, one that every homeowner, every neighbor, every quiet person watching from their porch needs to hear. Power only controls you if you let it. And if you stand your ground long enough, even the strongest tyrant will crumble under the weight of their own lies. So, if you've ever been silenced by people who thought they were untouchable, remember this. Their power only lasts until someone like you decides to speak. If you want more stories of homeowners standing up to HOA tyranny, hit subscribe right now, share your story in the comments, and tell me where you're watching from. Because Crestwood might have been my battleground, but the next one could be yours.